Right, welcome to the Ravit Show. I've just landed in London, and look where I am. I'm at the Yellowbrick London office with Neil and Joe Neil, our special guest today, who's the CTO at YCorp.
Correct.
So, welcome to the Ravit Show, Neil and Neil.
Thank you for coming, as always.
Awesome. It is always a pleasure to be at different offices that Yellowbrick has. Last time I remember, Neil, we met in Hong Kong.
That's right.
Before that, it was Mountain View.
Yes, we're a global
And today we
company,
are in
proud of it.
London,
Yep.
right? So super excited, and I'm kind of curious to learn a little about what Joe Neil does with at YCorp. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little about YCorp as well.
Right. So, long-time technologist, worked in Silicon Valley from 94 through 2020,
Yep.
and then came over to London to essentially build startup here, which turned into YCorp.
Yeah.
And YCorp is built on an eSIM architecture. So it's exploiting the next generation mobile functions, if I can put it that way,
Yep.
on mobile phones. And as you know, Apple is now only eSIM. And everybody's moving to eSIM. And eSIM architectures allow you to do some very different things. So it's a completely new wave of mobile function.
Yeah, kind of curious to learn a little more in depth, obviously, about the data. Obviously, why you are here at Yellowbrick. What's the relationship there? So, would love to know a little about, first of all, what's the relationship with Yellowbrick?
So we use Yellowbrick as part of our data architecture.
Okay.
So eSIM is essentially just a stamp, an electronic stamp on the phone,
Yep.
which gives the user access to obviously all of the mobile functions. But once the data starts flowing, it has to be processed, it has to be handled, it has to be handed off to our tenants. And our tenants tend to be businesses that use the mobile architecture. We essentially, what we do is with an eSIM, we create a mobile network for the customer, for the tenant.
Yes.
And that becomes their own managed mobile network. So it's a little bit like we create micro AT&Ts or micro Reliance Jio
Yeah.
for a business. So
Right.
the business can be its own mobile architecture, its own mobile network. And of course, it has to have the data. So we absorb and ingest all the data from the mobile phone through the eSIM, and then we hand it off to the tenant. So we
Okay.
need a big data architecture. So we use a data structure based on Yellowbrick.
That's awesome. I think for sure this is something very interesting space when it comes to telecom. I always kind of think about the data, and because there's a lot of data that kind of flows into the game, right? And I'm pretty sure you all need that smooth architecture when you're kind of working around with such a big lot of customers. So I'm kind of curious to learn from you, Neil. What does it look like when you see telecom industry, and what does it look like working with YCorp?
Well, I think what's interesting is YCorp is a really different take on traditional telco. We have a lot of telco customers who are doing, taking CDR data, running their networks, generating phone bills, running operational side of telcos and the billing and everything else. Traditional telco data warehouses, the data they get is normally based on who you're calling, what data you're using, what sites you're going to on the phone. What YCorp is doing based on eSIM technology is particularly interesting to us because they build this whole new layer on your phone. There's inherently now a tie between the applications and the network that they're using. And so if, for example, the Ravit Show was a YCorp customer and you had 50 employees and they all used YCorp sort of software on those phones, whenever anybody used certain applications that were tied to that SIM, you would know about that and you'd get that data as well. So what it allows is these customers to get a new level of much more structured, higher level data at other parts in the stack than would be possible otherwise. So very different from a traditional telco.
Very
But you do
interesting.
get the CDR data and all of that stuff as well, right?
Right. Yeah, we do. In fact, it looks very much like a micro network, a traditional network, but shrink wrapped, if I could put it that way, and totally managed by us. So if you take our platform, we essentially manage all the legal requirements, all of the registration as a telco, all of the DPIA, the data structures that you need to implement in order
Right.
to deliver the service. And we basically say we manage it, and you, Mr. Customer, whoever you are, an enterprise, you have your own mobile network that you now don't have to pay for to another classic MNO.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's yours. It's a bit like having your own little private 5G network, only it's even more interesting because now it's part of your infrastructure. You own the data.
Okay, so very interesting. That's one important thing that you mentioned about you owning the data, because that's
Correct.
often a question which is where we kind of get worried about the data privacy kind of comes into the game, the data governance. So
Correct.
you're kind of also taking care of that as well.
Correct. We essentially slice the network, and then all of the classical implementation on a data structure, right? We randomize and pseudonymize and so on, anonymize the data. We slice it and hand it off hermetically to each of the tenants. So
Nice.
if we had tenant 1, tenant 2, tenant 3, 3 different companies,
Right.
we would slice the data completely from the mobile phone through to that company on the eSIM. And the eSIM uses essentially what you have now is your own radio layer. So this is where it's big difference, because on a classic mobile network, you have a phone, you have a VPN on the phone, but you're sharing all of that radio network with every other app on your phone.
Right.
If you have your own eSIM tied to your company applications, now it's ultra secure. No other applications can use it. It's like having your own private radio network. So imagine having your own private fiber network. This is a radio network that's your private network to your phone.
Exactly.
Completely locked down, completely secure, and to the point where you don't really even need a VPN. Why would you need it? You don't have to. You don't have to
Exactly.
have someone else managing it.
100%.
So,
Neil,
I mean,
what do you think?
do you think you'll then come to a point where, if you wind the clock forward 5, 10, 15 years, most enterprise companies will actually be doing this instead of using VPNs? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why you don't need an SDN, you don't need a VPN,
Okay.
right? Why do you need it? It's the security layer on the eSIM is ultra secure, just like a normal SIM. And in fact, the GSMA have done amazing work on eSIM structures to make them ultra secure. So why not use that? And it's your own private radio network. No other traffic, your personal traffic on your phone cannot go down that eSIM if you lock your company apps to that eSIM. So it's a really interesting model. And yes, I think it will be companies will spin them up on demand and tear them down, literally, with very little notice. So you could imagine a scenario where sports teams and charities or government organizations have their own mobile eSIM-based mobile network. Why not?
I'm also kind of curious to learn a little. Thanks for sharing those insights. But I'm also curious to learn a little. I like as a media, I kind of hear. I meet a lot of enterprise leaders, and whenever there's a new data platform, they're kind of it becomes like an interesting thing. So I'm kind of curious to learn about what could be some new data platform opportunities for enterprises in this space. Neil, anyone who wants to take it first.
So essentially, then, we're moving into a model where enterprises would be slicing the data architecture in the cloud, right? So
Right.
everything's cloud-based clearly now. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, look, you can have a completely locked-down service to the mobile function. And the mobile eSIM can be on the phone. It could be in your car. It could be on the watch.
Right.
It could be in a router. I mean, it doesn't matter where the eSIM is. It's completely locked down and managed now. And why do you need to deploy a fiber network? Suddenly you've got 5G and 6G is coming with very high bandwidth. You don't need to have dig up the street and put a fiber in there when you could just deploy a cell and you're done.
Yeah.
So and it's very, very fast, right? Obviously that's infrastructure, but once the infrastructure is there, it's everywhere. And so I think that this is the model. This will definitely be the model going forward.
That's awesome. Neil?
I mean, I suppose one of the worries could be from the standpoint of data privacy then, right? That if suddenly my employer, for example, even though I'm using my company apps, it now knows where I'm using those apps from because it gets, triangulation data based on the network that can go through. It knows what hours I'm looking at my phone, looking at my Slack, looking at everything else. To some degree, they know that already, but it's not all... It's very dispersed, and there's a lot of ETL that goes on from all these different applications to put that together if you wanted to come up with this holistic view of what are my employees doing, my applications, my behavior. I mean, there must be some privacy concerns for this at the end of the day, that just like Google or others know so much about you, or Facebook or something, they know probably more about you than you really want them to know. I mean, they know, where you are, who you're with, what the state of your health is, who you're dating, who you're sleeping with. Like, probably don't put that on the video.
Yeah.
But, they know all of this stuff, right? Am I worried now with my eSIM that my employer is going to know most of that as well? I mean, it seems like there's going to be a new bunch of privacy concerns.
Not if, first of all, there are very strict GDPR, right? And all of the legal controls around privacy obviously come into play. Remember also, you're actually literally now an MNO. You're literally an MVNO. You are now your own mobile entity. What we do is we take all of the privacy concerns, all of the regulatory concerns, and we manage that for you. So it's privacy control as a service. It's regulatory compliance as a service. So we ensure that everything is compliant to the latest specifications and standards. And then we manage that and ensure that everything is sliced, is hermetic, and that there is no leakage of that. And on an eSIM, you can tie applications to the eSIM, so that, but in the same way that while only the company apps can access the company eSIM, personal data doesn't leak into it either. So it's not as if the eSIM can reach out and grab your personal Facebook or something. So it's literally a wall around the eSIM with your company apps tied to it, but no other apps can access it, and the eSIM can't access that. So the company's only going to know what you let it know, and it has the right to know, right?
Right. I think it's fantastic in terms of the data privacy and the governance that you're kind of following, because obviously that's like the biggest concern for companies out there, for even individuals out there.
Right.
So y'all are kind of managing that very well. One curious question for both of you. I'm sure we are in the AI world, and now I'm so happy that in this a few minutes of conversation that we have had, we've not even spoken about AI. We have not even spoken a word about it.
We probably should talk about AI.
So, okay, fine. So, curious question to both of you. How do you see it, AI coming into the game, about the work that you're doing right now? It could be where, no, we don't need AI right now. But if in future there's an implementation possibility of AI into the game, how does it look like?
I think for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, this is business data and behavioral data like anything else. I think one of the interesting things happening, you read and follow the hype cycle, right? And one of the interesting things now is a lot of people are starting to realize that LLMs, large language models, are not just about spoken languages. It's not about asking questions in English and it parroting back on English training sets or something like that. Language tokens, symbols that are next to each other can be used to describe all sorts of events as well, whether it's the things that happen to a car on the road when it's sort of doing self-driving or something. The events that are going on can be described with tokens. I was talking recently to the CEO of an interesting company that uses and applies LLMs for water management and actually opening and closing gates and ordering tests of water and controlling and measuring the amount of bacteria in water and applying treatments to water and distributing water more efficiently. All of these sort of business domains can be modeled as, data sets that you draw from, that you train on using a language that's specific to that domain, which doesn't have to be readable English, right? So all of these new data sources, whether it's the stuff that Joe's doing with eSIMs or elsewhere, I think it's going to lead to some sort of next generation new BI or predictive model type thing where we can define and explain or sort of create a language which is pertinent to business events, things that matter to my business, decisions that have been made in my business in the past, and you will train and you will get LLMs to act and advise and guide on what the best stuff to do is there. And this isn't really anything specific to eSIMs or whatever. It's just through new insights, new data. But I actually think that's probably going to be the next interesting wave of applications of LLM, not just big search engines that are like encyclopedias that return and solve basic problems or infer things, but things that understand things that matter to your business and decision making, and find really interesting ways to help guide that better, but using these large language models or newly trained ones.
Love it.
Just
Joe?
my thought.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Again, it's about hermetic LLMs, right? Inside the customer MVNO. So the customer's has a mobile network. but it's not even seen that way anymore. It's seen as just part of the of the company. And essentially now you've abstracted and decomposed and disaggregated completely the mobile function, and it's just data flowing into the network, and that's going to be treated by the relevant AIs that are, as Neil says, coherent for the business and that are applicable to the business model. And that could be anything. It could be movement of the UE of the mobile phone, or it can be what applications are being most used in what location, for example, right? And all of that and more is going to flow in. I think we're at the very, very beginning of this. We don't even understand the data sets that we are going to absorb and exploit going forward. I think it's a very exciting period for both AI and for the mobile data function.
Yeah, love it. Love those insights, and definitely looking forward to, in the next 1 year, I always say we are in this interesting times, and glad we are in this time of AI, because we kind of seeing all the interesting stuff happening. But such a great conversation, Joe and Neil. Joe Neil. Right. All right. So one last question I'm pretty sure the audience would have is, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to learn more about what are you working on, or just want to follow you, is LinkedIn a best place, or somewhere else? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, under Joe Neil. And I'm sure that Neil is as well.
Yes.
That's always the most professional way to get the contact. It's easy, flexible, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Joe Neil, for joining us on the Ravit Show. Such a pleasure. I'm so happy. As soon as I landed, I'm here at the Yellowbrick office and interviewing you all. Couldn't be happier to get such insights, and definitely worth it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today. It's really
Thanks, Ravit. Always a pleasure.
It's always a
Thank you,
pleasure,
Neil.
Neil. Thank you very much.